the open menu and the save menu, we can have a new sphere or we can have a new box. I don't like using the box much because it's got a weird texture on it. And then we've got the symmetry tool. So if I just have a standard brush and I go in, and you can see that we have symmetry along this x-axis, and if I turn it off, you can see that we no longer have a symmetry. Control Z is the undo tool, and we have here the draw size and the intensity size. So the draw size is basically how big your brush is. So you can have a very large brush, or you can have a very small brush. And the Z intensity is you can either have a very harsh, deep brush, or you can have a very soft brush. And again, Control Z to undo. So the draw size and the Z intensity can also be accessed by using U to change the intensity, and using S to change the size. This is for controlling your poly count. It's kind of a way of resetting or reducing the geometry if it's got too complex, and Core Mini has a kind of limit that it won't let you go above as well. So let's get into the actual brushes themselves. So the standard brush is kind of a gentle, soft, rounded brush that extrudes out from the surface. And the clay build-up is much squarer brush that aligns itself to the direction of motion. So as you're dragging, you'll get the edges of the square follow the lines of the marks that you make. The inflate tool, let's just put a dimple on here. So the inflate tool will actually blow the surface up. It looks much like the normal standard tool until you get to a certain point where it's actually expanding the surface, and you can see how you can create intersecting geometry when you do that. And the pinch tool is used to create hard edges, so it's very good for kind of outlining a surface, and if you want to make a defined shape, then pinch is the tool to use. We've got the move tool. This works really well for doing low frequency changes, getting the base surface right, or getting the key forms into your geometry. You just grab part of the surface and move it around. The snake hook tool, when you're using it lightly, it will add kind of a blob to the surface, and you can just keep going and pulling off the surface, and it will create these kind of extrusions, very thin extrusions. The slash tool is for cutting it in to the geometry, and the polish tool is for flattening out the geometry. All of these tools have an alternative use, so that is you can use the Alt key with them, but apart from the first two, their results are a little unpredictable, I find. So whereas with the standard I'm building up and I can hold down the Alt key and it will carve in, and the same with the clay build up. I can build and then hold the Alt key down and that will subtract from the build. Below that we have a color swatch that we can use to colorize. Just never play with it, or at least I don't see much of a point with it. And then we've got 8 materials. Again, you might have a preference on which material you would want to use. Possibly you might want to use flat if you want to focus on silhouette, but I tend to find that the matte cap is completely suitable and gives you a sense of the geometry through the shading. Over on the right hand side we have a perspective toggle which goes from an orthographic view, that is there's no foreshortening, to a perspective view whereby surfaces that are closest to us are enlarged. Then there's the rotate on all axes toggle. I pretty much leave it on Y most of the time. It's just what I'm used to. Then there's the local transform, which basically picks up on wherever you left off and rotates around that point. So if you're working on an area and you want to rotate around the actual point that you're working on rather than the actual model there, because obviously if you're zoomed into a piece and working and then you want to go and do a rotate, it'll spin away from where you're working. Whereas if you've got the local on and you're working on this area and you go and rotate, you can see that it stays roughly where you left it. Below that we have a floor toggle, so you can see a floor, and a framing toggle which will just frame the piece for you. And then we have a couple of buttons here. The first one is the move tool, which is very strange in its function because it doesn't constrain the cursor, which is okay if you want to move this way, but you can't really use it to move the object off to the right. I don't know whether they've thought about that much. Zoom tool is quite useful. You can just click over here and zoom in and out. And then the rotate tool again allows you to rotate the object. Again, it's limited if you happen to want to rotate off to the right. These navigation controls are also on the Alt key, so you can clicking open space to rotate. You can Alt click to move around, and you can Alt click and then let go of Alt to zoom in and out. And then lastly there's the line fill tool, which actually shows you what your triangulation is.